on the chapter, and we will discuss about the criticisms against the theory. As we were discussing in the last video, the theory of separation of powers was given by Montesquieu. We find this theory in his book The Spirit of Laws, where Montesquieu is of the opinion that the three organs of the government, that is the executive, the legislature and the judiciary, they should be strictly separated from one another, because he believed that if the three organs are not separated, if they are performing the work of the other, then there will be tyranny and there would be the individual liberty or the freedom of the people living in the state would be hampered. So he had given the opinion, he is of the opinion that the three organs should be strictly separated from one another. Now, this theory of separation of powers is also not devoid of criticism. That is, it also has some disadvantages of its own. There are a group of scholars who believed that this theory is not totally what we can say can be applied. There are some shortcomings and they have given their arguments against the theory. Today we will discuss about the arguments or about the criticisms against the theory. The first criticism that we find against this theory is the theory cannot be implemented in reality. The theory is good as long as we are reading it in the book, but when we are trying to apply it in the working of the government, then there will be problem because it is not possible to implement the theory. Now, why these scholars are talking about this thing? Because the scholars are of the opinion that in the modern states, the government has to perform different kinds of work. In fact, if we look at the work of the government has become much more complex and complicated. Its work has increased. It performs a lot of functions for the welfare of the people. The welfare activities have increased. The life of the people is no longer as simple as it was, and so the government has to perform a lot of work. This performing of various kinds of welfare activities, for the organs of the government, they need the help of the other organ, because they are not they cannot do their work efficiently without the help or cooperation of the other organ. If we want to apply this theory in reality, in practicality, we find that it is not possible for the government to carry on its work if the three organs are not cooperating or helping with the other, because the work of the welfare activities or the work of the government or the functions of the government have become much more complex and complicated over time. In most of the modern states, we find that it has increased, and to carry out this various numbers of functions for the people, the state needs the government needs the cooperation or the help of the other organ. Here, if the three organs are helping or they are cooperating with one another, then only the government can work efficiently, and then the state will do well. So the first criticism is that in practicality or in practical or in real life, we cannot implement this, or we cannot apply the theory of separation of powers because it is not possible in a modern state. The second is the criticism that we get is that the government is like an organic body, and here the theory is again not applicable. What do we mean by government is like an organic body? It is the government is like a living body. And the organs, we know that a living organism can survive or can live properly if all the organs of his body are performing its functions well. If one of the organs is incapable of doing its work or is not doing the work, then the body suffers, and it can also lead to the death of the organism. So, in the similar way, the government has been compared to an organic body, to a living organism, and if the three organs, that is the executive, legislature and the judiciary, they are performing their functions properly, they are coordinating with one another, then the government can function. Because if the brain is not functioning properly, then the body is suffering. If the heart stops working, the person cannot survive, the organism cannot survive. So, in order to survive, the living organism needs the cooperation or the coordination of the different organs that it has within its body. if any of the work of the organ is not being able to do its work, if it doesn't do its work, then the body suffers and the organism suffers, we can say. So in similar way, the government is also like that. The three organs, that is why probably the word organs have been used, that is the executive, the legislature and the judiciary, when they are cooperating with one another, when they are coordinating with one another, then the government will run efficiently, the government can carry out its functions properly, and then only the people will live properly or live happily in the state. So if we apply the theory of separation of powers in the state, in real life, in a modern state, what we find that these organs will not be able to function properly. There will be a problem, and that is not what the state is formed for. So that is the second criticism against the theory. The third criticism is that overlapping of functions. That is, again we have to go back to the first criticism, that if the three organs in modern states, the welfare activities or the work of the functions of the government have increased. It performs a lot of functions, and here we find that the functions are overlapping. That is, sometimes the executive is doing the work of the judiciary as of that of the legislature, and the legislature is also sometimes doing the work of the executive, or the judiciary is sometimes doing the work of the executive. It can happen, or it is rather, we can say that this is going on within the states, in the modern states. The functions are overlapped, where we cannot segregate, or we cannot separate the work of the three, because the three organs are not watertight chambers or watertight departments where the work is strictly demarcated. It is actually not possible to strictly divide the work of the government. If we look at the working of the government, then we find that sometimes the one is doing the work of the other, maybe not in totality, but sometimes it is required for the working of the government or working of the state. So overlapping of functions is there. If the functions are overlapping, then how can we actually apply the theory of separation of powers? Then this theory is not possible to follow or to apply in the state or in the government. The fourth criticism is that it creates deadlock and conflict. John Stuart Mill, he is of the opinion that if the theory of separation of powers is followed, then that will create a deadlock, or that will create a conflict among the three organs of the government. Because then each organ will only fulfill or only try to preserve its own interest. It will do only its work. It will not try to cooperate. It will not try to look at the working of the other organ of the government. Now, if they are strictly following their or strictly fulfilling their own interest or preserving their own interest, then there is bound to be a conflict of interests. And if there is a conflict between the three organs of the government, then the government cannot function, and that will create a deadlock. That means the state is also unable to discharge its duties or to perform its duties, which is again not desirable. So, according to the scholars, that this if the theory of separation of powers is applied, then that will create a deadlock, and there will be a conflict among the three organs of the government, because three organs will try to preserve its own interest. It will do only its functions. It will not be bothered. It will not be at all taking care of the functions or taking care of the interest of the other, which may ultimately lead to a conflict that will result in a deadlock on the functions of the government. That is, the government would be unable to perform its functions. So, for today, we keep up to this much. We have done 4 criticisms that we get against the theory of separation of powers. In our next video, we will take up the other arguments or the other criticisms against the theory. Thank you.